everyone, welcome. I'm Jan Rashadams, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Mayshad. We are an ecosystem of brands for women by women, connecting women to each other and to the companies, causes, and organizations that champion equity for women professionally and personally. You're watching Speak Your Mind today with Dr. Risa Ryger, and we have so much to talk about today. Let's bring Risa in right now. Hi, Risa, welcome.
Hey, Jan, great to see you. It's fun to do the show with you again.
It's so fun. I'm happy to stand in for Neza Alawi, our incredibly fearless founder and CEO. So happy to be back with everyone here this morning. So we have so much to talk about, but Risa, I know that we usually set off your show with an incredible story from the last week to help to help ground our conversation, and also honestly to help us all feel like we're kind of all in this together in this really crazy moment in time. And we were having some really funny, hilarious stories that we were sharing amongst us before we started the taping today. But Risa, what would you like to share with us this morning?
Okay, I'm going all in, Jan, and I'm going to share this particular story. There are many, but we're going to go with this one because it seems to be a favorite of yours. And since you're here with us today, let's do that. First of all, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for coming and joining us today. You're here, you're part of the sisterhood, and we're thrilled to have you. So this is my share. I wonder if any of you remember at different points in time, what I say is during this time of enormous crisis and worry and stress, and a loss of patience. Our patience goes down the tubes because we just don't have that much reserve in our tanks. I always said, bring more love. Now I want to share with you a story in which I enacted that with enormous difficulty, but in which I enacted that. So of course, during this time, our hot water heater broke. And that was it. It was done. It needed to be replaced. And so the people came in. They were incredible. They were very conscientious about wearing masks and cleaning up and doing all of that. And then came the time where we needed to run the water and make sure that everything was okay. Now, so I was busy and my husband was taking care of some of that. And I was on doing my thing. And then sometime the following day, and we had hot water, which was really, really great. That wasn't discolored anymore. All right. So then my husband was taking care of that. And there's a part of our house that there's a long hallway and you can have two doors closed and then it becomes its own kind of, enclosed area. And all of a sudden I'm here, I'm busy, I'm working, and I hear, oh my God. And I was like, what happened? What happened? And it was like this hallway and these little rooms at the end where it was a rainforest. He had created a rainforest in my home by doing this one special trick. And you too can know what the trick is to build the rainforest in your home. What you do is that you turn on your shower full throttle in hot water, seal the area off as good as possible, and then just wait. And you too can have droplets the size of silver dollars coming down from your ceiling.
Risa, how long do you wait?
It depends on how much steam you want to have and whether you want to, I don't know, I imagine that even in the rainforest, there are seasons in the rainforest. And so if you're going for full throttle, head-on rainforest season in your home, I would suggest that you leave it on for at least 24 hours. And if it's not enough, fear not. You can enclose the area longer. So, of course, my husband felt horrible. We were trying to figure out what happened. Then it became very clear what happened. And of course, you can even imagine what was going through my head and all the things that I wanted to say. And being true to my word, I dug deeper and I just said to myself, bring more love. Bring more love. And it's like, and then what happened was, well, we're going to have to take care of this. we're going to need to address this and do something about it. So long story short, so there's, carpeting that's been pulled up, windows open. We did beat out mold, but if you're looking to build a rainforest in your own home, this is the, please use this advice. And secondly, when something happens that you've had nothing to do with, and it's impacted you, I knew he felt horrible. I knew he felt horrible. So piling on at that point wasn't going to be helpful. Sometimes you need to pause and wait a couple of weeks and then go back to it. But bring more love. It can help for the moment. Just try to find more love. So with that, let's kind of move on. Did I do that okay for you, Jan?
Risa, thank you so much. That is truly one of my favorite COVID stories. But, it's interesting, Risa, because, we talk a lot about empathy and patience and understanding. And usually we talk about that from an employment perspective, like what do we as leaders within companies or within our own businesses need to do during this period of time to ensure that everyone who's around us as a stakeholder feels valued and respected and to your point, loved, honestly. Right. But I think sometimes we forget about this moment in time, also what's required to exercise empathy and understanding and patience and love inside the house.
Yes.
Which is interesting, Risa, because it's also a really good segue to the theme of our show today, too.
Well, we've got a lot going on here today. And I think first off, let's at least, pay our respects to an extraordinary woman who really knew how to use her voice to have impact, to help change our worlds and help make our worlds really a better place for women to live in, to give women more options. And how much more can you say when there's someone who has gotten the first part of the name is notorious, the notorious RBG, and that when else has a Supreme Court judge become, for women, a role model, and that women of all ages, from young girls on up, can connect with her. I know that one of the incredible images of her that I hold dear is to see her at the age in her 80s working out with her trainer with dumbbells in her hand. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, look at this woman. She's incredible. She's such a thinker and she's just brilliant. And she's doing so much to really try to move the needle forward. And she's working out. She is it. Had kids and was told that if she wanted to go to law school, right, that she could find a way to do it, to get childcare. And so she walked the talk.
She really did, Risa. And I think looking back on this, and, we often talk about using these shows at some point in the future as time capsules for a glimpse back into historic moments and times. And no doubt has this last, 6 months into this now, been a very historic moment in time. And I think we'll all remember where we were when RGB died, right? Which was just, a couple of days ago now. I think that, to your point also, Risa, and I keep reflecting on what you said at the beginning of our episode today, RGB, Ruth had incredible passion, not just for those who are on the same side of the fence of herself, but just for humanity and really, truly wanting women and human beings to have, more opportunities, to have more choice, to be better in their own ability to live into their fullest potential. And honestly, she was friends with people who were not on the same side of the political fence of her as well. And I think that really speaks to her moral compass and her own personal values as well.
Well, one of the things that she talked about, and that's useful for us at this point, or at any point in time, is, how do you communicate? How do you use your authority in a way that has impact and that other people can hear? And it's a huge challenge. It's not an easy thing to do. It's a huge challenge, particularly, as a woman with a voice of authority. I mean, I don't know how much, you're on the Supreme Court, you're a Supreme Court judge. I mean, that's a role of authority, and how you get your voice heard at this point, and certainly, whether you're a voice of authority in your own home, you're a voice of authority on your team, you're a voice of authority in the courtroom, regardless of where it is. What does your voice of authority sound like? And then, of course, later when we have our fabulous guest, Meredith Renquin, come on, what is your voice of authority sound like as a woman in a male predominated scene? And so this is the beginnings of our conversation, and really a very, very important one.
Risa, so I'm interested, for your perspective on women that are in traditionally male-dominated industries. And we know that, women have made significant strides across all different verticals, but particularly in those places and spaces where women have traditionally been underrepresented, there's still some tensions that come up in the sense of, to your point around how we communicate, how we think about things like conflict resolution, how we think about working across, differences and variances, but then also some of the assumptions that we make to be true about men that actually elevate and place them in a higher regard. And when women participate in those same sorts of behaviors or try to exude their authority or their assertive powers, they're perceived to be different, right? And less than, or perceived to be in that negative light. Let's talk about a little bit about why that is. And I know that we'll talk about this when Meredith comes in as well, but wanted to get your take on it from the psychology perspective.
But women historically have had places where they can use their voice, and places where they're, even if you do use it, you're just not heard. So, and that your voice really doesn't have value. And so it's a challenge of time to be a woman with a voice, and that your voice can be the voice of authority, and that your voice can be worth listening to. And so the first step in some respects is that to get comfortable with your own voice of authority, you have to be clear on where you are the authority and what your authoritative versus authoritarian voice sounds like. And so, at one point in time, there was the idea that you needed to kind of mimic what men sounded like. You needed to kind of figure out, what the dance moves were and what the music was, so that you could, come in and go along with it. And things are different now, fortunately. And so women are more comfortable, but still, we have a lot of ground to cover on this in terms of women being able to not go in yelling and screaming. Women generally don't have that same deep voice that men have. That seems to, we imbue that with the idea of being taken care of and being protective, and that this is really the person that we should listen to, the person with this lower pitched voice, this person who may be bigger, has broader shoulders, just gives the illusion of being, the person who's going to take care of it. Now, sometimes, as with everyone, there are people who are competent, there are people who are caring, there are people who are committed, and there are people who aren't. And so, we don't need to, and we're not demonizing men, and we're not angelizing women. And because that would be a hard place for us to come together. But the first step is really to own your own authoritative position, to own your own authoritative stance. You need to have it for yourself first, so that really speaks with authenticity, so that when you speak, you're speaking with this authentic voice. And there's a lot of confusion about that, to your point, Jan, about, well, what's the, what are the adjectives that are used for women when there are men who are doing the same thing, and there are a different set of adjectives, for men. So that, for example, being being a leader. That person has great leadership skills. Oh, she's just being bossy. The man, he's great. He's great at following up, and he checks to make sure that things are really moving along. She is such a nag. Can you believe it? Nag, nag, nag. And that's on the one hand. And then also there's a lot that gets projected onto people, projected onto women. And this is where we have to go even deeper in terms of unconscious bias and the unconscious bias of, towards women, of expecting women to play some sort of maternal role, right? Be the maternal person, to be the nurturer. And that's certainly something that people can do, but to have that be an expectation that you're there to nurture, you can be there to support, you can be there to supervise, you can be there to help people grow, but it doesn't mean that you're the nurturer. And then if you step out of that role, well, then you're the bitch. And so it's, kind of what's our playing field, as women, and that we need to create our own. And part of that is not just being women taking on a male's style, but really having our own style.
And that's evolved too, Risa, because when we think about, I think particularly about the 80s and 90s, right, where women were rising within the ranks. And there was definitely an assumption that you had to wear the tie, right? Like if you're a woman and you wanted to climb that corporate ladder, you had to put on the tie and go to work every day and pull up your big boy pants and, and live in that role. There's also a way in which we judge others based upon just appearance, let's face it. And that holds true so much more for women than for men. Where, how many times have we heard people say, well, she doesn't look like a doctor, or she doesn't look like a judge, or she doesn't look like, XYZ, fill in the blank, whatever that is, right? A biochemist or a professor or et cetera, et cetera. And I'm hoping that we're in a place now where we are evolving from that as well. But also when you're thinking about unconscious bias, there are the ways in which, we're still projecting onto people, particularly onto women, just from the way that they look and what they're wearing and how they conduct themselves and the non-verbal cues that they use and et cetera, et cetera.
I'm going to bring up an example of that. When there's a man who's become a father and he stays home, right? He takes paternity leave. It's like, what a great guy. He cares about his baby. What a great guy. And then when he comes back to work, there's no assumption that he's off on a different track. Now, when women take maternity leave, there is an unconscious bias that, oh boy, now she's on the mommy track. And so the cautionary tale here is not to go along with the bias, but to be able to recognize it. I mean, it may be where people go in their heads to begin with, but that doesn't mean that that's where you have to stay or that's where you should stay. Even though it's your first thought, there is absolutely no reason why it needs to be your second, third, or last thought. And so that the idea of woman, becoming a mom, taking maternity leave, and then coming back to work doesn't mean that she's left her brain behind with the diapers.
We're gonna have to edit some of that out, my laugh, but I mean, Risa, that visual is so very powerful, and I think right on point with the sense of, and also creating a space where women feel welcome to come back as well. We're gonna have to edit that out as well, because I'm also thinking about many women who have taken a couple of years off to have kids, and rightly so. That's their choice, and they should be entitled to do that, and to feel supported in that decision. But I also think that there's a moment in time where women then don't feel comfortable and don't feel welcome in returning as well, and then 2 years becomes 10 years, 12 years, and I've spoken with many women out here in the suburbs who have said, I used to be this, I used to do this. And so in the way that we think about identity, which we talk a lot about identity at Mayshad, there's a sense of loss that I think many women feel when they've left positions of authority right? Because their worlds have changed and shifted, and they don't feel included anymore, and coming back to that non-traditional role.
And for women who are in that role and they've decided to stay and be the CEO of their home, which is a huge job. It's not like they've given up their job. They've just changed jobs and taken on a job that probably has more moving parts, that there is reentry. There is the possibility of reentry in different kinds of ways. And there are ways of getting help in order to reenter. So you haven't hung up, you haven't set yourself out and out of the picture for the rest of your life. You just haven't. And that's one of the ways of being creative, connecting, getting help, connecting with your sisterhood, asking. And if you want to go back into the workforce in a different position, that door may not be closed to you. It may not be the same door that you were in, but that doesn't mean that the door is closed to you.
Should we bring on our very special guest for today?
I can't believe how perfect the timing is to have Meredith here as we're talking about Meredith. I don't want this to sound awkward for you, as we're talking about RGB, and we had already decided that we were going to be talking about what it's like as a woman to choose to be in an adversarial role, that there's a part of the role that's adversarial, and there's a part of the role that's fiercely working for the benefit of people. And so it's a very interesting combination. And so, Jen, I don't know if you'd like to do the more formal introduction.
I think that's a perfect introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, Meredith Renquin, attorney at Ruth. Oh my gosh. Ladies and gentlemen, Meredith Renquin, attorney at Rutherford and Christie. Hi, Meredith. Welcome.
Hi, how are you doing? It's so good to be here.
It's so good to be here. It's so funny because Risa was saying that we had planned to do this episode prior to what happened, unfortunately, in the loss and passing of RGB. But, so happy to be doing this now, because I think it's a very special tribute to her and to her legacy. And I think particularly right now, for those of us who are watching in current present tense, we have an election coming up in 45 days. Yeah. And so, this is a very historic moment in time. And I think that, for the majority of us across this country, we feel like we've suffered a great loss for many, many different reasons. Risa, to your point earlier in our conversation, just the amount of respect and love and admiration that we had for her as this icon of what it meant to be a woman who rose to that level, to just the influence and the power that she held onto. And when we think about what's really now at stake in the next 40 days, even before we get to the election, there's a lot. Meredith, I'm wondering, talk to us from your perspective. What did RGB mean to you in the sense of how you shaped your career?
Gosh, it's a difficult question, but also a very easy question. So I think for me, growing up, there weren't a lot of female role models in very powerful roles, especially not in law. And I remember being in 8th grade saying, I want to be a lawyer, but I don't know if I'm smart enough to do it. And I had one guidance counselor that was very encouraging about being able to get there. So you see, Sandra Day O'Connor, then you see Ruth Bader Ginsberg, and you realize, like, hey, I can do this. And not only can I do it, I can do it very well. And so when you have somebody that sits on that platform and you realize, okay, I can model my career after her, or I can be a different kind of attorney, just as successful, but also know that she was a woman that asserted herself, used her voice, was highly regarded in the same sense that any man equally on the court was. Her road getting there was a little more different, but she still had the same respect at the end of the day. So for me as a woman, seeing another woman getting that kind of respect is, how do you, it was very inspirational. And I think that having that to look up to for all women, especially now children growing up that will now be without her, I think it's a great loss. And for me personally, when I saw the news on Friday night, I really had to stop, take a minute during the weekend and just kind of before watching the news about now what the Senate's going to do, what the president will do, who he's going to install rightfully or wrongfully at this point. So there's a lot at stake, and it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds.
So Meredith, this is Jan and I are giving you the 1-2 here.
Okay, works for me.
Okay. So just a fast backstory, which is that Meredith at first went into hairdressing, and
Yes.
then made this incredible shift. So you never know who's cutting your hair, and whether it's through hair or there's something else in front of them. So we can't make assumptions here. So Meredith, how did you go from that to deciding to go into litigation? And litigation, it means conflict.
Mm-hmm.
That's why people litigate, is that there is a conflict, and that for women, typically have some, ideas about there being conflict averse. And I'd love to know, I'm sure our audience would love to know, how you decide to go from that into an area where you're choosing conflict.
Well, I think so. Actually, being a hairstylist for me taught me a lot about people and the human experience. I think when you're intimately touching somebody, cutting their hair, you get to know a lot about people's personalities, different ways to deal with people. And for me, I was in undergrad, I majored in communication. While I was doing hair, that helped me communicate better with my clients. I think realizing that I could also be an effective communicator in a courtroom is kind of what pushed me into litigation. I think too, in all honesty, when you see enough law shows, you think, hey, that seems like an interesting way to practice law. Although, one trial is condensed into 1 hour, whereas one case will usually take 3 years to litigate. But, I think for me, it was a more natural segue because it allowed me to take all of my communication skills, not only from my undergraduate studies, but also from my 10 years plus of being a hairstylist and knowing how people operate, what's the most effective way to get what you need for your client in a case before a judge, during a deposition, while you're investigating, all aspects of that. And that is kind of what pushed me towards the area of litigation.
We talk a lot about just, what's happened in the last 6 months with COVID and the way in which it's really just infiltrated every aspect of our life, professionally and personally. In what ways is that playing out for you in the work that you're doing? And particularly as we think about communication, right? Because it's, I loved the analogy of, touching people in, when you were doing hair and in getting to know them and developing those relationships by having that physical contact. And now we're all, instead of doing this interview live, which we would have loved to have done in the city, where, we're all in very different places and spaces right now. But how has COVID impacted the work that you do? And do you feel like it's hindered or helped the flow of communication?
So in my firm, we do all litigation. So most of the days, my days were spent in a courtroom, in a deposition. And that's primarily, you have your office where I'm very fortunate at the firm I work at. We're very collaborative. We're very supportive of each other. We want to push each other forward. So for us, being in the office so much with each other in a courtroom and in depositions, we really had to adjust quickly to the changing environment. And I think the courts were not necessarily prepared for that either. I think for a while they were thinking, oh, we'll just keep doing this in person the way we've been doing it and it'll be okay. So now what has happened is, it varies by jurisdiction, but they've all gone online. And so we've done, a lot of our court appearances have been via Skype. Sometimes they're on the telephone, and that's been probably months in the making. As far as courtroom experience, or dealing with the court via Skype, I would say it's a little more difficult, only because there's something lost in not being in the same room with someone. As much as you try and connect with them or get your point across, or, get what you need out there in front of the judge so they understand your argument, the best way to advocate for your client. It's a little different when you're confined to a screen. A judge is sometimes in their home, distracted. There's things going on around all of us. So I think it's made communication a little more difficult, whereas when you're in a courtroom, the judge is completely focused on what you're saying. As far as depositions, other forms of discovery, that has been, I would say, a specific challenge in that, again, body language. You're not really able to read what somebody's doing. So recently, I did a deposition and I kept looking at my notes and then looking up at the camera to ask my next question. And the witness said, I don't appreciate that you're rolling your eyes at me. And she made this big statement. And I said, okay, for the record, I just want to be clear that I'm not rolling my eyes at you, but I'm looking at my notes and looking up at the camera, which is odd because you're really trying to find your camera. So it looked like everything I was, saying was an eye roll. So it's made communication a lot more difficult. You have to be a little more deliberate in the way you do things and you say things, and your arguments have to be that much more clean because you're challenged by the technology that's in front of you to make sure you're getting out there what you need.
And would you be able to share with us, pre-COVID, when you were going, some of your experiences when you were going into the courtroom and, as a woman there to fight, you're there to fight for your client, right?
Yeah.
That's it. It's, we don't, sometimes we go, well, I'm here representing my client, and that's one part of it. But to be a representative of a client is also to be someone who takes on fighting for your client. And could you share any experiences that you've had with men, either in the supportive or in what is she doing here, experiences that you've had? I think that would be really helpful.
Okay, so I'll give you both sides of the coin. And first, I'll give you the challenges, and then I'll give you the supportive. So in my firm, the way we're organized is we're handed a case, and we start the case from start to finish. We manage all of it. And so when I started working for Rutherford and Christie, David Rutherford, my managing partner, was very pro-woman and it doesn't matter if you're a woman or a man, you can do this job just as good as I can do. In fact, there's actually more female associates in our firm collectively than there are males. So he was, for me, the positive was he put us in a courtroom setting or in a deposition setting and trusted that we could do our job effectively, regardless of our gender. Going into the courtroom was a completely different experience. And I think in a way he knew that we were all going to go through it. But I remember 15 years ago, the first time I walked into a courtroom, you're usually in a big calendar call, at least in my experience, that was in state court. And you walk into this giant room and you see 100 attorneys, and 20 of them are women and 80 of them are men. And they all the men know each other. They're all older. And so then they realize, if you're less experienced, I'm going to school the woman. I'll school her as to what she's going to get and what she's not. So I remember one conference in particular, and a male attorney told me, a judge is never going to give you that. And I didn't even flinch. I said, that's fine. I'll ask the judge. And I got exactly what I needed in that particular case. In another case, it was arguing a very, very difficult motion. And I had a very contentious relationship with the male attorney, mostly because he was like, I've been practicing. You hear that a lot. I've been practicing for 35 years. And what do you know? And I remember we did the argument, and it was a very long, tedious argument. We finished, and the judge ruled in my favor, and we started to walk out of the courtroom, and he said, bitch. And I said, what did you say? And he said, I didn't say anything. I said, well, I thought I heard you call me bitch. And he said, no, I didn't say that. And he quickly ran out of the courtroom. So, in those early days, I think if I hadn't had a thicker skin, it would have been a little more difficult. On the positive side, there was a case that I litigated in Dutchess County, of all places, and their courtroom experience is more formal there. But I remember the way you're positioned on a lawsuit is how you lead in that case. And I was lead on this case, and I think maybe my first or second year in. And the other attorneys that were co-defendants with me were much older gentlemen, one of them being, I think he was around 75. But I remember I was leading, and he was very encouraging about the way I was doing the deposition and what a great job I was doing and how good an advocate I was for the client in court. And so every time we had to go for a conference, which was every other month, he would say, let's go get breakfast. And so we would go to the diner after the conference and have breakfast. And he would tell me about his experience, but also give me like points of encouragement to be a better advocate for my client and still, lose nothing in the process that I was like a woman fighting. Did I look bitchy or complaining? No, he was very, supportive of going in, getting your work done, and not really worrying about the rest of it.
It's interesting because we often talk about kind of the binary effect of gender, right? And so we often think of, when we think about gender equity, we think about men versus women. When we think about racial equity, we think about, Black people versus white people. When we think about, politics, we think about, are you a Republican or are you a Democrat?
Mm-hmm.
But we also know that there's a lot of intersectionality there that complicates how we show up in each and every day. And Risa, you talk a lot about like how we show up, like how are you showing up as your best version of yourself? Meredith, I wonder in your space too, when we think about, gender equality, I think that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done just in how women support each other.
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I do think that, I think sometimes it's not uncommon if you have two women in an adversarial role for them to see who can strong arm each other. And so I think for me to adjust to that early on in my career was difficult because I couldn't figure out like, hey, we're both women on the same side of the spectrum. Like, why are we butting heads with each other? So with some people, I will say not all, you have to try and find your common ground. There's still some adversaries that you will never find a common ground with. It's always going to be a butting of the heads. But there's some where I've had really incredible experiences where you like, I have a very difficult case pending right now, and I had to do a deposition of this plaintiff, and her attorney, also female, after the deposition was over, said, I don't know how you do your job. And I said, well, I have a client to defend, and I know you know that because you have a client to represent. And she said, no, I mean it as a compliment. She said, because you're during the deposition, you're poised, but you were also respectful to my client. She said, but I can't imagine what it was like to have to ask those difficult questions and maintain your composure through all of it. And then at the end, she said, I appreciated that you were so gentle with her, despite the fact that you have a client to defend. And I think that it comes down to respecting your adversary, even if you're trying to figure out in your own way, how do you be a strong advocate as a woman for your client? I also think too, there's something to be said about learning from somebody, even if you don't get along with them, as opposing counsel. And there's been many situations where I think, I will mention a very tough case where this woman really just gave me a run for my money, and another point where I was lead on that case. And I think we had 8 depositions in total and many, many court appearances, a very complicated case. And even the male attorneys in the room said, I don't know how you're dealing with her as well as you're dealing with her. But at the end of the day, as difficult as she was with me, I still thought to myself, I'm going to learn one thing from her, a tactic, a way she handles a question, a way she presents some evidence. And at the end of the day, I did learn something from her. And a whole lot of what I didn't ever want to do, no matter what happened in my career in litigation. So I would say, like, when you're looking at that, it's difficult to find your way, connect, be friends outside of an experience where you're both doing the best for your client to advocate, and support one another, because even that one person that terrorizes you in some way is going to teach you something that makes you a better attorney, that makes you a better litigator. There's always ways to improve. That's why they call it practicing law. So
I really love what you just said, Meredith, because it also humanizes, and I think builds rapport for who you are and the work that you do. Because we often think about law as, as we think about it, like compliance, we think about like regulatory factors or, whatever that is, in the sense of like, it's very black and white sometimes, right? But
yes.
I think that learning from those who are even very different from us that we may not agree with, I think is incredible advice, particularly leading 2 months into the election, right? Because we're in a very divisive world right now, a divisive country, I should say, where my fear is that we're not learning too much from each other, no matter what side of the fence you sit on.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly.
And so, just to piggyback on this, that there's you as lawyer and there's you as person. I mean, of course, you take your person in with you, but then you need to lawyer. And that for women, I think it's been a great experience to be on sports teams, in that you in your role, your job is to win, to do your best and to win. And that means that somebody else has to lose, right?
Yeah.
And that sometimes it's been that girls who are friends are on different teams, and they need to go up against one another in the competition. And it's so important to learn that when you're doing that, when you're on the field or in the courtroom, that you're in there doing your job and you're doing what you need to do. And that it doesn't have to be personal. So that girls who are coming off the soccer field, or they're coming out of the basketball court, or off the baseball field, and one team beats another, somebody's winning, and that the same can go for law, that you can go in there and they understand, right? And have you seen that also, where there's an understanding and there's a mutual, as you say, a mutual respect for the skill level of an attorney, and that you're not necessarily, gunning for someone personally, but you're using your skills to do your job. So is there something about that you could comment on?
Yes. And I think, to your point, I think that you can get to common ground where you're both respectful of the fact that you're doing the best for your client. You're doing your job when you're in court, and you walk out and you can be friends. I will say one gender difference that I noticed, especially when I first started litigating, is men will go in and they'll go head to head in the courtroom, and then you'll see them walk out with each other, slap each other on the back, and then arrange their next golf meeting. Does that happen less with women? I would say yes, but I think too, I one specific instance that comes to mind for me, there was a much younger attorney that was up against me on a case, and she was nothing short of brilliant. She was in a position that she shouldn't have been in. She was in a firm that wasn't supporting her. But I remember going to court with her and thinking, this woman I like litigating with, because she was very smart and I respected her for that. And she also respected me in the same way, although we had very different opinions about how that case was going to come out. And I remember, even through that litigation, we were able to walk out. We would go outside in court. We would meet, have coffee, be friends. And I remember after she decided to leave her firm, she asked if she could use me for a reference in her new firm. And so the partner from that firm called me, and he said, "So I realized that you were an adversary on a case with her." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I find it highly unusual that you would give her a recommendation." I said, "I have to tell you, she is very articulate in court. She's very polished. She's very intelligent. She writes very well. And I don't know if she'll beat me on this case or not, but she would be an asset to your firm. And we need more of that, because I think women don't see that, and women don't think, how can I elevate somebody else even if they're on the other side?" And you find your ways, you get your little opportunities to do that. And for me, that was a good opportunity to elevate somebody that I felt deserved a better position than she was in.
There's a way in which we internalize, right? We internalize praise, we internalize critique, and we take it very personally, whereas I think that just stereotypically men don't do that for a lot of different reasons. And I think that that's largely because we're socialized as little girls in very different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, this is a time where we need to really rethink our relationship to ourselves and our relationship to each other as well, if we're really going to make significant progress happen, no matter what happens on later in November. But Meredith, from your experience, what advice do you have for women who are listening to this episode today, who just heard this incredible story of how you were able to depersonalize and still hold someone else who may not agree with you, but in a very high regard, and be very respectful, to the point where you understand that it's not about you, that the attack or the confrontation isn't about you, but it's about the position, or about the sense of responsibility and duty one has to their client, to their community, to their network, to et cetera, et cetera?
It's a great question. I think that not taking it personally, to your point, is difficult. And for me, I struggled especially when I was doing hair, you really like, because people will be critical of what you're doing, what your work is. I don't like how you cut my hair. I don't like the color you did. So you really have to, for me, that was the basis of developing like a thicker skin about the criticism. Are there times that I've gone and completely cried after court? Sure. I think we've all been there. But what I would say to anybody that needed to hear it is, don't take it personal. Find a way to elevate yourself. Your own self-talk has a lot to do with the outcome in what you get and how well you do in your field. And I think in every situation, myself included, you go and you doubt, did I do a good job? Did I do enough? And then you have to, at the end of the day, say, yes, I did enough for my client. Now, how can I help somebody do enough for their client? Or what can I contribute to make all of us get to a better place where we're like, okay, I did do enough. I am good enough. I'm smart enough. I can be in this position and be very successful at it. And I think that really, like, that's probably the best advice I could give.
And to give yourself permission when you need to go behind closed doors and cry or scream or
I have done that many times.
Absolutely. And also that in different positions that you may not be liked.
Yes.
Right. And I think that for women, there can be, the pleasing, and I'm really a good person and like everybody should like me. And there are going to be people who don't like you. And certainly in court, there are certain areas where those, that can grow very, very easily because there's an adversarial relationship. And in the courtroom, and I'm going to just say, in the courtroom doesn't mean that it has to go outside of the courtroom, but getting over the fact that somebody isn't going to like me, or they're not liking me, because if they liked me, then something different would happen.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. That's something you kind of have to leave at the door. So I used to say to my colleagues and also remind myself when I would go into court, like, you have to take your personal feelings about what might be the outcome and leave them at the door like a suitcase. And then when you walk out of the courtroom, you can pick that suitcase up and go on your merry way. But in the courtroom, it's almost like, I have, for myself, been in the courtroom, and I think I'll do an argument and a judge will, be, because they've just fired questions at you. They'll interrupt you, they fire questions, and then they're coming at you like rapid fire. And you think to yourself, if I may, can I get this point across? And I remember there would be times I would walk out and think, who was that person that just made that argument? And the truth is that person was me. I'm all those things. I'm a good advocate for my client, but I'm also, a different person, outside of the court that can leave the bag at the door, pick the bag up when I leave.
What an amazing way to pay tribute to RGB. Risa, final thoughts and parting words for the day.
Yes, of course. First of all, I want to thank our wonderful, wonderful guest, Meredith, for coming and giving up your morning to come and be here with us. Thanks so, so much. If anybody has any questions for me, you can contact me at drr@expertingchange.com. And I have free resources for you, so don't hesitate. And 2 takeaways from today. And I will put this in my takeaway bag as well. So one is that even if your advocate is whoever they may be, that you can learn from an adversary. I'm sorry. You can learn from an adversary, and don't close your ears, don't close your eyes, and don't close your mind to what you can pick up just because that person seems like not like something that you want to emulate, but you can still learn from that person. And then 2 is that to monitor ourselves in terms of what might be getting in our own way internally. And are we holding on to a belief that we have to be liked or that we should be liked? And that when that doesn't happen, or it may not happen, that we can feel bad about that, we can be upset about that, but to really be able to take that in and to unpack it and get a better understanding and come to terms with the fact that if you're doing your job, that people may not like you. And that's not the purpose. Thanks so much for joining us here today. Remember, our sisterhood will continue next week. Please do join us. And as always, we've saved a seat for you.